So, if I say the word caste, if you are Indian or of Indian origin, what happens? Images spring up in your head, fairly negative images. Think about vote bank politics, think about birth based discrimination, think about reservation, think about untouchability. The list goes on and on. But here's the thing, when you examine it deeper and you do the research and you look at the history, you find out a few things. Firstly, caste as we know it now in the 21st century isn't even Indian. Secondly, whatever way of classification of people that existed in Indian society, it was nothing like the caste system that we recognize today. And thirdly, untouchability happened, but it wasn't the caste system or Indian society, it was a very, very different villain behind it. Our old friends, the British Empire. So, we're going to get into all of this in the upcoming episode. Here on the WARC Indian History Podcast, our mission is to restore Indian history, free from the biases and distortions of the past few hundred years. We will do this via an evidence-based approach, which means more facts and less opinions. If this mission is something that matters to you, please do like, subscribe and share. All of this really helps. Thank you so much, and on to the episode. So, the objective of today's episode is as follows. The first thing that we want to do is we want to tell you about the original system of classification of society in India. This is not the caste system that you and I recognize today. It is very different. So, we'll talk about that first. What we will then get into is how did what we recognize as the modern caste system today, with all of its negative aspects, how did it come to India? How did it develop in India? What happened? There's a whole, unfortunately, pretty sad history there. And lastly, hopefully by the end of the episode, you will get a very good picture of what Indian society was, what happened to it post colonization, and why it is where it is today, and maybe some thoughts on what we can do in the future. So, to begin with, what was the original system in India? For this, I'm going to hand it off to my podcast co host, Sumedha Verma Ojha, author, historian, a wealth of knowledge, and she's going to tell you all about it. What I'm going to ask somebody who has the knowledge is two or three things. Firstly, what was the original intent of the caste system, right? How was it designed? Why was it designed? Was there any benefit in the design? Was there a purpose behind it?
Thank you, Utkarsh. I'm so glad that you've picked up a topic about which all of us talk all the time, and many of us don't really know anything much. So, what was the original intent is something I'll answer in one word: organization. It was organization of society. It was classification of society, not just society, it was classification of the cosmos. So, Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra are not people who are born in certain clans or families. It is a classification of the entire universe. So, to give a small example, even soil is classified in one of the four Varnas. So, soil is definitely not, it's not, it doesn't even have any life. Ancient Indians liked to make sense of the universe. They made sense of the universe through observation, through understanding the properties of what they observed, and then classification. So, if you translate this onto people, society, how did it happen that this Varn system came in? First thing, the Varn system is theoretical.
Could
It's
I
not.
just stop you for a second there again, just for somebody like me? What do you mean, or what do we mean by Varn? If you
Yes,
could just
I'll
double
come
click
to
on
that.
that.
I'll come
Yeah,
to that. Just
yeah,
remember, it's theory, okay, not
yeah.
practice. Now,
Okay.
I'll go back to telling you how we went from what was actually observed and seen and classified to this Varn system. So, for that, I will start with Kul, Jati, and Sampradaya. Kul is the family you are born in, extended family, not the nuclear family as we think of now, but the extended family. That is, say, your clan, the Scottish clan, something like that, the Kul.
Yeah.
The Jati is a big group of people following the same occupation. So, again, remember the word occupation, it is very key for understanding both the Varn system and its distortion, which is called the caste system. So we've reached a group of people who follow the same occupation and who live together and who do the same thing. That is Jati. How does this segue into which god you follow? what we call in English or in Christian terms religion. So that is through Sampradaya. In the last podcast, also, we had spoken of Sampradaya, that these were the different gods and goddesses that you thought of as the ones you revered. You could be a Shakt, you could be a Shaiv, you could be a Vaishnav. Within these, also, there are so many other Sampradayas, and all of them had their own ways of worship, their own rules and regulations about everything. So, this was how it was managed at the real grassroots level. What do we pick up here to understand the so called caste system? We pick up Jati. Jati is an occupational group. There are innumerable jatis. There were innumerable jatis all across the subcontinent, and even more, during modern times, it was up till Afghanistan. So these jatis followed the same occupation. They lived in the same way. They had certain customs. They tried to intermarry, rather intramarry, but there was also intermarriage. I'll come to that a little later. So
Yeah.
this is what perhaps we understand as caste, but that does not solve the problem, because then what is Varna? What you have been mentioning, Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra, that is not Jati, that is Varna. So, what is Varna? Varna is a theoretical system of four large divisions into which all these jatis are supposed to fit in. Please note what I'm saying. They don't really fit in like a perfect puzzle, they're supposed to fit in. How does this work? So, there is a jati of, say, agriculturists in Bihar, the same jati of agriculturists, say, in Karnataka. In Bihar, those agriculturists become very powerful. They then say that we are not Vaishya, we are Kshatriyas. They then say, no, we are not even Kshatriyas, we are Brahmins. In another part of the country, those same agriculturists are not so powerful. They don't have that much of a status. They remain Vaishyas. So, what am I hinting at here? Mobility. Mobility. Each jati changed its position according to its specific situation.
So you can see already, these are terms that all of us are familiar with. Here and there, we hear the word jati. One, maybe not so much, but we didn't really know what it means. In fact, we go to Google and ask them, if you ask Google Translate to just translate jati, it says caste. And we just talked about it. These are very different things. So, speaking of caste, where did this whole idea of birth based discrimination and this whole idea of the stratification of society into different, almost, it is different, it's almost a class system in a way, better classes, worse classes. Where did this come from? Again, I'm going to hand it off to Sumedha Verma Ojha, and she'll tell you a story which has a very, very foreign origin outside of India.
So now I'll come to what happened. What is this caste? So when the Portuguese first came into India, they saw a system of organization. They could not really understand it because they did not understand either the language or the people or anything. So they thought it is the same as their casta. Now, their casta was a race based, color based social organization where the whites were at the top, and then all the mixed races, depending on how light their color was, came below those.
Could I
That
just
was
pause you there? What was that word? Casta. Is
casta.
that is
Casta.
that a
It's a
Portuguese word?
Portuguese word. Yes. And
Okay.
indeed,
Okay.
it refers to color. It refers to race. Our Varn is a system of classification with no reference to race or color.
This is ridiculous and fascinating. The word caste itself is okay. I didn't know it had a Portuguese origin and deriving from a Portuguese system. Wow. Okay, go ahead, please.
So then they assumed, they thought, well, it must be the same as us. The Portuguese were very, very cute people. They went into a temple and saw some people praying. So they thought, yeah, this is Jesus Christ, only a little different. And, the people are also a little different, but they must be praying to Jesus Christ. So in that way, they just kind of extrapolated their own experiences. Therefore, they called it the caste system, and they put in a lot of racial characteristics into it, and they put in color, and they put in the color of the skin, which was just not there. So this is how the word caste came into being. So what happened when the British decided that now this country is ours, we must understand and run it the way we want? So they decided to do a caste census. So they wanted to know which caste do people belong to.
When was
So
this?
This was the first one was in 1871.
1871. So
Yeah,
relatively recent. Okay.
yeah.
Even in
It's
the
pretty
context of the
recent.
British Empire.
So what
Okay.
you see now, everything is, you know, legacy. A lot of it is legacy. So 1931, of course, was their last caste census, the Brits, after 1871. So what problems did they encounter? People did not know. They asked, okay, what is your caste? They did not know. So some of them would say what their jati is. Say, I would say Kayas. Another person would say no, Ambasht, which is a subcaste of the same jati. Another person would say no, my caste is Punjabi. Another one would say no, I am a Kannada. Another one would say my caste is Bihari. So do you realize how many different categories are being put into the same basket? Why is this so? Because there is no definition of this caste system. They came up with nonsensical results and they themselves kept scratching their heads about it. But now, once they done it, they had to go on with it. And what was the very important thing that it did? It froze categories. So if today you said, I am a Vaishya from the Agarwal Jati, there you are. That's it. Next 100 years, you can't change. There is no way of mobility up and down, nothing, because the government has strictly written down this is you and this is where you belong. You dare not move, we will not let you move. This was the biggest disservice that was done to Indian social organization through the British census. Indian state Bharat, that is India, came into being in 1947, and wholesale, lock, stock, and barrel, it adopted these ideas about caste, forgot about Varna and Jati, and it said, this is how we are going to organize everything.
So there we go. Caste, casta. It's not Indian, it's Portuguese, and you can kind of see the biases from which it developed, which were not really Indian in origin. The third thing that we want to talk about specifically is untouchability. What was the reason for it? So I'm going to hand it off. I'm going to hand it off again to Sumedha Verma Ojha, and we're going to go through it.
The work of the Vaishyas and the Shudras, which was totally disrupted by British colonialism. So, the work of agriculture was absolutely killed through over taxation. Then
Yeah,
things like
especially Bengal.
textiles, things like pottery, artisans, these
Yeah.
were smashed by importing factory made, industry made goods into India and not letting people produce their own things. So, what happened? There was a huge part of India which was thrown into poverty and complete kind of, they had no hope. They were a hopeless and completely poor, poverty ridden, unhealthy, very, very terrible situation for them. Then, very cleverly, they came up with this idea that it's not our fault, it's the caste system.
So by now, if you're still watching, firstly, thank you. Secondly, I think you've gotten a better idea, but let me summarize what I have taken away so far. Firstly, Indian society from ancient times, from Vedic times, from pre Jesus Christ times, so to speak, already had a very sophisticated way of classifying itself. Classifying society is not inherently a bad thing. It is a necessary thing. Today, you classify society by professions. You have the finance industry, you have the manufacturing industry. This is normal. So the what we think of as the one system was essentially that. It was not birth based. It was classifying, and it had this was a group of people who tended to be scholars. This was a group of people or a profession that was in charge of, say, trading. It was pretty much that. We also have to be careful not to apply a excessively modern lens. What happens to us in the 21st century is that we are so used to the social mobility and the occupational mobility and the sheer level of opportunities that we have because we can travel from this part of the world to the other part of the world or whatever, or this part of, say, India to another part of India. That kind of mobility didn't always exist in human history. It wasn't because of bias, it was just technology. Majority of human history, people have lived within, say, a 50-kilometer radius of their homes. So this is how you can understand why people tended to take after their parents' profession, and you could tend to have, it wasn't officially birth based, but practically it may turn out to be birth based because the son of a potter becomes a potter, so on and so forth. But this was not a strict bias, and I think several examples were cited of mobility between the different professions. So that's the other thing. The third thing to recognize is the ultimately racist origin of the caste idea. In fact, one thing that I am doing these days is I'm not even using the word caste. Or if I have a conversation with someone about caste, I tell them, okay, caste is this European racist precept kind of imposed on Indian society. It is a reality of Indian society today, don't get me wrong, but that is not the way that it was intended to be organized. And we can get into a whole different discussion on what we can do to rid society of these modern, um, rather rather discriminatory structures. But caste, casta, European origin, classifying people by race, hence imposing that upon India, and then, of course, the Indian government wholesale taking that on in 1947. That was unfortunate. Um, we'll have different discussions on the reasons why, but you can see that. And untouchability, I mean, it is fundamentally an outcome of the destruction of the professions of an entire group of people, an entire province of people. You know, the destruction that was wreaked by the British Empire on, particularly on the eastern side of the Indian subcontinent, modern day West Bengal and Bangladesh, was dramatic. An example that I often give many of my friends is that if you think of today's most richest provinces in the world today, think of the Silicon Valley, California, think of New York, the city. That was the equivalent of what Bengal was at maybe 200-300 years ago, and today it's, I mean, or maybe say 10 to 15 years back, it had become one of the poorest. So that was the range of sheer destruction and exploitation that happened to this particular part of the world. And not that exploitation was restricted to Bengal, and untouchability arose because of this exploitation of the British Raj across the subcontinent. All right, so I hope this was fun. So we'll be doing more episodes where we take excerpts from the WAC Indian History podcast and we try to put it together for you in a digestible, simple video format. Do give us feedback how this format works for you, and I'll see you next time.